So after the attacks of September 11th, Osama bin Laden instantly became the most wanted man on the entire planet. And then, poof. For almost a decade, he just vanished. The trail went completely cold. So how did the mastermind of 9/11 manage to just disappear from the world's most powerful intelligence agencies for so long? Well, the answer is way more shocking than anyone ever imagined.
You'd think the search would end in some remote, fortified cave system in the mountains, right? Nope. It ended right here, in Abbottabad, a bustling city in Pakistan filled with military personnel. He wasn't just hiding out, he was living, pretty comfortably, deep inside a country that was supposed to be one of America's key allies in the war on terror.
And that's the part of this story that's just so wild. This wasn't some shack in the middle of nowhere. His compound was literally just a few miles from Pakistan's most prestigious military academy. Think of it as their version of West Point. So how on earth was this even possible?
To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to rewind the clock a few decades. You see, the story of bin Laden's final hiding spot really begins with a very complicated relationship between the US and Pakistan. This was never an alliance built on shared values. It was more like a marriage of convenience, aimed at a common enemy, and it was built on a pretty shaky foundation of mistrust.
Okay, so take a look at this timeline. It all kicks off in 1979, when the Soviets invade Afghanistan. The US, wanting to make this a nightmare for the Soviets, starts pouring money and weapons to the Afghan rebels. But here's the crucial part. The middleman for all this was Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. They took the US aid and handed it out, some of which went to a group of Arab volunteers led by guys like Abdullah Azzam and his very wealthy student, Osama bin Laden. By 1989, Azzam is killed, and bin Laden takes over what would become al-Qaeda, an organization literally born from a war that was indirectly paid for by its greatest future enemy.
And this quote from his mentor, man, it tells you everything you need to know about the ideology here. This was never a fight for freedom or democracy. While the US thought it was fighting a proxy war against communism, guys like Azzam and bin Laden saw it as the first battle in a global holy war. For the US, their extremism was just an inconvenient little detail. But for Pakistan, they were a strategic tool, and those conflicting goals would come back to haunt everyone.
All right, let's fast forward to December 2001. After 9/11, the US invasion of Afghanistan had bin Laden and his fighters cornered in the Tora Bora mountain range. You had thousands of US Special Forces, CIA guys, and their Afghan allies closing in. It seemed like his capture was just days, if not hours away. This was their chance to get him. And then, it all just fell apart.
What happened was a complete chain of failures that just opened the door for him to escape. First, the US was relying way too much on local Afghan fighters who, would just leave the front lines every single night to go break their Ramadan fast. Next, the two main Afghan commanders they were working with were bitter rivals who spent half their time fighting each other. And then, the final, biggest mistake. A US commander on the ground requested 800 Army Rangers to block the mountain passes and seal them in. The request was denied by General Tommy Franks.
And this just shows you how agonizingly close they were. At one point, Delta Force operators were actually listening to his radio chatter. They knew he was just 6 miles away heading for the border with Pakistan. But they were pinned down, their local allies were nowhere to be found, and they couldn't go after him. He just slipped right through their fingers into Pakistan. And then, for 9 years, the trail went completely cold.
So what's life like when you're a ghost? Well, for the next 9 years, bin Laden moved around between safe houses in Pakistan. He finally settled into this purpose-built compound in Abbottabad around 2005, and he became an absolute master of staying hidden, using extreme discipline and really old-school techniques to stay invisible in a super high-tech world. The absolute secret to his survival was this: the courier system. Bin Laden knew that any phone call, any email could be traced in a heartbeat, so he used none of it. Instead, he had these super trusted couriers who would take his messages on a thumb drive for hours, sometimes nearly 100 miles away, just to use a public internet cafe. This super low-tech method created a huge, impossible gap for intelligence agencies to track.
And the compound itself? It was basically a fortress designed to be forgotten. We're talking massive 18-foot walls topped with barbed wire, a controlled, double-gated entrance, and here's a big one: no phone or internet lines at all. They burned every last piece of their trash right there on site so nothing could ever be collected and analyzed. It was designed to be a complete black hole. Information went in, but nothing ever came out.
Life inside those walls was, well, it was bizarre. This guy, the world's most infamous terrorist, owned just a handful of outfits.
He apparently wore a cowboy hat whenever he walked in the courtyard to hide his face from satellites. He treated his health problems not with doctors, but with things like apples and candy bars. He spent his time watching news reports about himself, writing, and even supervising his grandkids' gardening contests. And get this, for the last 5 years of his life, he never once stepped outside those walls.
The secrecy was so intense that even the kids living in the compound had no idea who he was. One of the courier's little girls just knew him as Miskin Baba, which means poor uncle. Her dad told her he was just too poor to go out to the market. Then, one day, she saw his picture on TV and recognized him. After that, the families had to be kept totally separate to keep the secret safe.
But this incredibly careful world he built was doomed to come crashing down. You see, the very system that protected him for all those years, his total reliance on a tiny, trusted circle, it also carried the seeds of his own downfall.
In the end, it wasn't some fancy gadget that got him. It was just patient, old-fashioned intelligence work. The CIA spent years hunting for his couriers, knowing they were the only physical link to the man himself. Once they finally figured out who one of them was, they just followed him, and that trail led them right to the front door of that strange compound in Abbottabad. The single point of failure in his perfect security system was simply another person.
You can imagine, the raid was a huge embarrassment for Pakistan. Their official story, after their own investigation, was that bin Laden just kept a really low profile. It's a classic case of what's called plausible deniability. It's basically the official way of saying, we had no idea, and you can't prove that we did. But for the U.S., the idea that he just slipped through the cracks in a city crawling with military officials, well, that never really sat right.
And this all brings us back to that one huge, lingering question. How could the most wanted man in the world live for years right next door to a nation's military elite without somebody knowing, without at least some level of help? The manhunt is over, yes, but the full truth of how he hid in plain sight and who might have helped him do it, that remains one of the most unsettling mysteries of our time.